Hey there, this is Kelly Sienkowski. This is In the Spotlight, and today we're shining the light on how Virginia's recent snow and ice storms impacted wildlife around the Commonwealth. Joining me today is Katie Martin with the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. Katie, thanks so much for stepping into the spotlight this morning.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and ask, when people think about the Department of Wildlife Resources, we're thinking game wardens and fishing licenses. What do you guys do?
Yep, that's a good first step. So, here at the Department of Wildlife Resources, we are the state agency tasked with managing all of the inland fish and wildlife in the state of Virginia. So, we span across the whole Commonwealth, cover all the different wildlife species. We do have our conservation police officers, we have wildlife biologists, and we have fisheries biologists all across the state. So, we're here to take care of and help people with wildlife issues all across the state of Virginia.
Well, that's perfect because recently Virginia had a major snow and ice storm where it developed into snowcrete, that frozen solid layer of ice on top of everything. So when something like that happened, what does that mean for wildlife?
Sure. So this was definitely a crazy winter storm we had over the past few weeks with, snow, ice on top of it. But one of the greatest things I always tell people to remember is these wildlife species are adapted to live in all different types of climates, all different types of weather. And so while to us that seemed really cold, really miserable, you have to remember that things like white-tailed deer, black bears, many songbirds, they live in Alaska and Canada where they have snow way, way more than we have. So they actually have a lot of really good adaptations to manage things like this. Even though in Virginia we don't get weather like that all that often, thankfully, these animals are really well adapted to those conditions and can actually survive it pretty well without much intervention from people at all. And so for many species, really their best line of defense is they have these nice thick fur coats that they grow in for the winter. So you think of like a white-tailed deer, they molt in the late summer, early fall, and they get this really thick, darker gray colored coat, provides wonderful insulation. So in those cold temperatures, they're nice and warm, they're pretty good. Many animals just will completely reduce their movements, kind of lower their metabolism, lower their needs, and so they just don't move around a lot. They're going to hunker down, kind of like we do. We like to just stay cuddled up under a blanket inside. Wildlife kind of does the same thing. They're just going to reduce their movements and try not to have to be out as much as possible during storms like that.
So that was something people were saying is that, oh, I see a bunch of deer at the bottom of a hill. I think they can't get up because it's too icy and they're slipping. Are they okay?
So more than likely, now the ice was certainly treacherous for people and wildlife alike. I know a lot of people probably took some spills on all that icy terrain that we
Oh,
had
for
out
sure.
there. And so certainly the ice made it difficult, but those animals, deer, a lot of our fur-bearing animals, they are really well adapted even on all types of terrain. So they can get around it. They'll find a different way to go. So I'm sure some deer, some animals likely did fall, suffered injuries during that ice part, especially just being slipping and sliding on the ice.
Right.
But a lot of them then would limit that movement, try to find a food source that they could still reach. The beauty, thankfully, with this last event was that it wasn't super deep across most of the state. 6, 8 inches. I think I heard in the far western mountains, maybe up to 10 inches of snow and then that ice on top. So a lot of vegetation was actually still available above that things like deer could browse on or that birds could find seeds and still get food from it. So it wasn't like we had 3 feet of snow that just covered everything, thankfully.
Right. So they could still forage, not necessarily on the grass directly, but they could find other sources.
Exactly. And for many animals this time of year, that is what they're used to eating. They actually, again, talking about white-tailed deer, during the winter, they mostly eat twigs and things that don't sound very appetizing or appealing to us. But all of that type of browse material, we call it, that's what they eat in the winter. So they could still reach a lot of that even in these conditions. Or they'll actually eat some things that are maybe not their number one preferred food source, but during when times are tough, you'll eat it. So things like privet,
Right.
an invasive plant. They'll go ahead and they'll browse on that because it's available above that snow cover.
So for people who were saying, oh, think of the wildlife, throw your vegetable scraps out and make sure you have extra bird food out there, not really necessary.
Nope, so we definitely recommend not feeding, even during the wintertime when things are like that. Now, feeding the birds, if you follow some best management practices, using good quality bird seed, cleaning your feeders, that can be great, just a great way to watch wildlife, watch birds in the wintertime. But other animals, nope, we don't recommend feeding them for several reasons, but a lot of it is you'll just end up concentrating those animals in a single area. And
Yeah.
so, just like with people, you put a lot of things together, and if one of them is sick, they can end up passing things around that way. So, again, think of people in the winter, kids in school this time of year, all the colds running around, deer and other wild animals, same way. So, we don't want them all concentrated on these single food sources. We also don't want them getting used to these unnatural foods that they really shouldn't be eating and that they're not actually made to digest. So, they can actually end up having problems trying to digest these foods that are not what their stomachs are made to take this time of year.
So for you and your team, when you guys have this sort of a weather event, what does that look like for you guys? Are you out there managing or assessing conditions and trying to find signs of like how the wildlife is actually doing? What do you guys do?
Yep. So during events like this was actually really great. So I work with black bears a lot, and we were able to go out and visit a lot of bear dens. So bears during the winter, they're just going to go take a nice long nap. And so they don't hibernate truly in Virginia, but they will find a place where they can lay down, lower their metabolism, lower their body temperature. They just sleep it out through these type of events. And so this was great weather for us to actually go visit some female bears in their dens, see if they had any cubs. That was fantastic weather for that. But we're also taking reports, talking to people out in the field, seeing what they're seeing, we having any negative impacts. And thankfully, even with how long that snow and ice stayed on the ground, we got very few reports of any animals actually suffering injuries or dying, which was really great. Thankfully, it seemed like there were pockets that started to melt, and that food was available that these animals could get to within a few days, and so we had very few reports of anything very traumatic. But yep, we kind of are out just keeping an eye on it and seeing, but mostly we just saw wildlife doing what wildlife does best, and that's just out there going about their daily business.
So that it sounds like what you're saying is even though this is an unusual type of a storm for Virginia, the wildlife, they know what they're doing. They can hang out and ride it out.
Yep, even though again, we don't get this type of weather that often in Virginia, these animals are just adapted for it. They've got good fur, thick coats. We had a really good fall food sources, so things like acorns from oak trees were really plentiful
Mhm.
back in the fall. So a lot of these animals were in super great condition as we went into the winter, and so they can just kind of live off of those fat reserves. Winter is never a time when animals are really packing on a lot of fat. There's just not the foods out there for most of these species. So they're just living off of what they kind of packed away in the fall. And thankfully, this fall set them up for even if we had a hard winter, they were in really good condition.
Well, it sounds like these animals are conditioned and they know what they're doing. It was interesting to see a lot of people asking questions about, oh no, these animals are going to freeze outside and they can't find their food and what should we do? And you mentioned that you did see some reports of injuries. My understanding, I mean, for wild deer, for example, there's not a lot of option for them. We're not necessarily rehabbing them and releasing them. What do you guys see if you get reports of injuries?
No, that's correct. So a lot of these animals, they're super tough. They're very resilient. Of course, they live in the wild all the time, and so they can get through things that to us would seem really horrific, but they're able to really just
Yeah.
get through a lot of it. And so, no, we don't rehab any adult deer across the state at all. It's just really hard to put a deer in captivity and try to mend anything. Thankfully, a lot of what we saw were just some scrapes, maybe some bruises and bumps, nothing too terrible. Those animals can get through that. Now, if we saw an injury that we thought, okay, this animal's not going to be able to go about their daily lives, they're not going to be able to continue to find food, then we would probably have to euthanize the animal. Just go ahead and
Um,
respond to it and just and put it down just so it's not suffering. But we did not get any calls like that I'm aware of that we had to do that. So
oh,
it,
that's
it did
great.
not seem like we had any horrific injuries out there. Again, these animals just kind of know they want to be cautious. They don't want to to put themselves in a precarious spot either.
I do want to ask because you mentioned it. How are our black bear population looking?
We have a really healthy bear population. We do have an area kind of over in our northwestern mountains where we have sarcoptic mange. It's little mange mites that can impact bears. They can impact any fur-bearing animal. And so, yeah, get really crusty skin. They lose their hair. So we do have some areas where that is impacting our bears, but really statewide have a very healthy bear population. And a lot of the dens that we checked this winter with all that good fall food source, they were having cubs. So should
Okay.
be lots of young bears out and about this spring.
Good. Well, I'll have to check it back in with you because I'm sure once the bears start coming out of hibernation, we're going to have a whole bunch more questions.
Yes, yeah, that always brings a flurry of activity and questions as those bears really, of course, they wake up and they're very hungry, so they're looking for food. So that early spring is a really important time for people to make sure you've got all your foods, no trash, no bird feeders out that bears can get into so they can just find natural foods.
Right. Well, Katie, I really appreciate you helping us understand what's happening outside of our door. I mean, it's really easy to look at a frozen yard and worry. So it's helpful to kind of talk about how the wildlife is built to handle this winter and what our roles should not be. We don't really need to intervene with them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to see that people care. I love that people ask questions and are interested in it. And hopefully, while everybody was stuck at home, maybe they got to watch some wildlife, see some birds that they hadn't seen before. It's a great way to kind of really get out and see what those animals do. And then as the snow starts to melt, it's really cool if you can walk around, go down by creeks and see all the tracks and see where those animals were
Yeah.
congregated and where they were able to actually find food. And it's a great reminder for people if you have property where you can create good wildlife habitat, then that helps them even more get through things like these winter events that we have. If you've got good habitat, those animals are in great shape. So kind of will lead you to be able to do some projects maybe this summer to have better habitat for animals in the
There
future.
you go. So, for our listeners, the Department of Wildlife Resources, you can find their website at dwr.virginia.gov. They have lots of information about wildlife, habitat, hunting, fishing, conservation, lots of information that's out there available for us. So, thank you guys. Katie, thank you for stepping into the spotlight. And for all of our listeners, if there's something else that you want to explore, you want to learn about, or someone you want to hear from, make sure you drop me a message. Katie, thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a great day.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.